All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today we're going to break down a really high-stakes gambit playing out in the Persian Gulf. The US has just made a huge move, a really bold move, designed to corner Iran. And honestly, it could change everything. So let's get right into it.
Okay, so think of it like a chessboard. A major piece has just been moved. The big question is, what happens now? To really get our heads around the strategy here and, the potential fallout, we're going to lean on the insights of Ambassador Dennis Ross. This is a guy who's been in the room negotiating with Mideast leaders under count 'em, five different U.S. presidents.
So when you ask Ambassador Ross what he thinks, his take is pretty crystal clear. He says this isn't just a big decision, it's a smart one. Now that really makes you stop and think, right? In a region this explosive, what's the difference between a smart, calculated move and just a reckless gamble? Okay, first things first. Let's really unpack the strategy here. To get why people are calling this a potential game changer, we have to look at the leverage, the push and pull in this really complex dance between the US and Iran. So here it is. This is the absolute heart of the strategy. And it all comes down to one word: leverage. Before, as you can see, Iran was pretty much in the driver's seat. They were exporting their oil, making money, and using that cash as a political weapon. The whole point of this new policy is to just shatter that reality. By choking off Iran's oil exports, the US isn't just cutting off their funding, it's trying to fundamentally flip the entire power dynamic over there. Now take a look at this, because this is where the strategy gets really clever. Half. A full 50% of China's oil flows through this one narrow waterway. All of a sudden, this isn't just some US-Iran spat anymore. Nope, it's a direct threat to the energy security of the world's #2 economy. And that threat, well, it creates a massive new incentive for Beijing. See, China is one of the only countries that has real, serious economic leverage over Iran. So the bet here, the strategic gamble, is that China, to protect its own oil supply, is going to be forced to do something it's avoided for a long time: put some real, genuine pressure on Tehran to just back down. This whole strategy isn't just about what's happening right now. It's also about breaking a really bad habit from the past. To really grasp how significant this is, we got to look at this cycle of behavior that's pretty much defined how the West deals with Iran for decades. For years, and I mean years, the international community has been stuck in this really dangerous loop. It goes something like this. Iran does something provocative, right? They cross a line. The world, terrified of starting a war, kind of accepts it. And just like that, a new, more dangerous normal is set. And then what happens? The cycle repeats. Iran pushes the boundary even further. You want a perfect example of this whole cycle? It comes down to one number: 60%. That was the level of uranium enrichment Iran just up and announced it was going for. And let me tell you, that sent some serious shockwaves around the world. And here's why that number is so alarming. The UN's own nuclear watchdog, they've said it themselves. There is zero civilian reason to enrich uranium to 60%. It's basically a stone's throw away from being weapons grade. And yet, the world kind of just learned to live with it. That incredibly dangerous new baseline was, for all practical purposes, accepted. And that right there, that gets to the absolute core of what this new policy is trying to stop. As Ambassador Ross says, the Strait of Hormuz is an international waterway. It belongs to everyone. If Iran can just control it with threats and force, well, then we're living in a world where might makes right. This new move is a direct challenge to that whole idea. It's basically saying to Tehran, the free ride is over. But look, a strategy this big, this bold, it's just not going to work if the US tries to go it alone. It absolutely has to have a united front. So that brings us to the third piece of the puzzle. Can the US actually rally the global support it needs to make this thing work? The whole strategy really depends on this one idea, that other key players around the world have a powerful self-interest in seeing this succeed. We're talking about the neighboring Gulf states, America's allies in Europe, and maybe most importantly, China. They are all critically dependent on oil flowing smoothly through that strait. That shared vulnerability, that's the glue that could hold a coalition together. So how do you do it? The plan to isolate Iran looks like it has three main parts. First, you isolate them politically, maybe with a big UN Security Council resolution. Second, you hit them where it hurts, economically, with a global coalition putting on sanctions. And finally, you back it all up with military pressure, making it clear that any threat to that waterway will be met with a very real, very decisive response. And that brings us to the most critical and frankly the most dangerous question of all. When you take a regime like Iran's and you back it into a corner and you cut off its money, what happens next? How does it lash out?
To even try and guess what Iran's going to do next, we have to stop thinking like us. Every country acts rationally, sure, but it's through its own lens, its own history, its own survival instincts. So from inside Tehran, looking out, what's the rational move when you're facing what feels like an existential threat?
Well, the biggest fear, the real worst-case scenario, comes down to a pretty simple, brutal piece of logic. If we can't ship our oil and make money, well, then nobody else around here is going to either. So what does that actually look like? It means Iran could start hitting what are called soft, high-value energy targets. Think about massive, sprawling oil facilities and processing plants in places like Saudi Arabia or the UAE. The goal would be to cause maximum economic chaos, send global oil prices through the roof, and basically force the U.S. and its allies to back off.
And this is really where you can see how calculated the U.S. strategy is. According to Ambassador Ross's analysis, a naval blockade is a much, much smarter play than something super risky, like trying to physically seize Iran's own oil terminals. See, a blockade accomplishes the same thing. It stops the exports, but it does it from a safer distance. It minimizes the direct risk to U.S. forces and avoids a really bloody head-on fight.
And so that's where we are. We're at this pivotal moment. The pressure is on. The old rulebook has been tossed out, and the stakes just could not be higher. The great unknown now is whether the defenses of Iran's neighbors are strong enough to withstand a desperate counterpunch. A bold new strategy is in play, and all we can do now is watch and wait to see if it leads to peace or if it leads to war.